all right, we can build this.
We will know this time next year if NextBlock is going to work or not.
That's the winning ticket. You actually have a developer.
Does your thing actually deserve money?
VCs discover billions wasted on inefficient engineering teams.
If what you're doing has value, people should be willing to pay for it.
We don't have anything to actually show people yet. Until then, we have nothing, and why would someone give us money? You're listening to Flirting with Bitcoin, a weekly chat with my very interesting husband about Bitcoin and how the world and our family's life is better because of it.
It's season 4, and we've moved to Nostr City.
So my Bitcoin lessons are done?
Your Bitcoin lessons are never done.
So what does new social media have to do with it?
Babe, Nostr is more than social media. If Bitcoin is the new money, Nostr is the new internet.
You really think so?
I do. I believe Nostr will drive the next wave of Bitcoin adoption. So Nostr City is where we need to be.
We?
Yeah, of course we're bringing Keon. You got your bags packed, buddy?
Yes.
Good job. Don't forget to pack your NPub.
Let's go. Hey, Ian.
Hey, Mandana.
We're officially in the holiday season.
Yes, Thanksgiving was yesterday.
Thanksgiving was 2 days ago.
Even better.
And we have our Christmas tree up.
We do.
This is our first time ever having a real Christmas tree in our home as a couple.
First time I had a real Christmas tree in a very long time.
Me too. It feels so good.
I'm happy you are enjoying it.
I know you are, but it's so funny because, you know, being the Bitcoiners that we are and, you know, fighting against the fiat world, it's a very fiat thing to buy a Christmas tree, right? Or no? What do you think?
I think Christmas trees as a business are unsustainable. So probably fiat.
All right, but we're doing it.
Yeah, you wanted it.
I know, and I'm sure this is what it's like to be married to Bitcoin, right? You're constantly pushing your Bitcoiner spouse to do fiat things.
Yep. That is exactly what's going on.
Do you want to talk more about that, babe?
No, you said it very succinctly.
I said it very succinctly. And I know it's going on, and I'm still going to do it because I love Christmas.
Yeah, that's kind of fiat.
Yeah, it is. But, you know, I think it's important to know for our longtime listeners and new listeners that when it comes to gift giving, Ian and I don't do gifts. We don't do gifts to each other, and we don't give gifts to people. But what we do give is Bitcoin. And how do we do that?
Sats cards made by CoinKite. You can go to coinkite.com and get your own. We don't sell our own yet.
Not yet. Maybe never, but we'll see.
We'll probably sell some for NextBlock.
Probably.
NextBlock will have branded Sats cards. And then maybe we'll get some Flirting with Bitcoin ones as well.
Yeah. The cool thing is, a couple of weeks ago, I was able to tell all of my cousins, because you might know I have a really big family. My cousins are like my siblings. I said, have your children check the Sats cards that we've given them over the last 2 years because the value on there has gone up.
When we were giving the first cards out to your cousin's kids, I was like, here's some Bitcoin and I'll give you some cash so you don't feel like you're getting robbed. But next time you bring me this card, then we can talk.
Yeah. And it's really cool how it's played out. The one advantage I'll say to it is when the next year comes around and it's time to give more gifts for whatever reason, holiday or birthday, the parents have to give me the Sats card so I can re-up it, right? They have to send me the information so I can re-up it. And they rarely do. So the intention of giving the gift is still there. But then, you know, no money out of our pocket because the parents can't even, you know, possibly be responsible enough to bring that back to us to add more.
People have been conditioned to lose gift cards.
Mm-hmm.
You spend $47 of your gift card and then you just toss it in the garbage and say, oh, that $3 that's still on there, what am I going to buy with that? You know? So yeah, I mean, a lot of people we gave $20 in Bitcoin 2 years ago. It's like $100 now. If they can't find the card, I'm not giving you any more. It's that simple.
Yeah, it is. So time will tell if this approach.
Well, maybe they'll find it in like 20 years.
Yeah. And that would be even more amazing. Yeah. Right. That's true. Time will tell, but how long does time need to be to tell? That was a very deep thing of me to say.
That's not how deep things work. But
Time will tell, but how long does time need to be to tell?
This is Mandana 2 months into the tech world. She's sounding like a freaking tech visionary.
Just so you guys know, I'm wearing acid wash jeans and a black turtleneck. I'm in the uniform. When we did our presentation or practicing for our presentation for adopting Bitcoin, I was really getting into it. I was using my hands, putting them in different directions, bringing them together, clasping them. I really liked doing that motion. When it was time to actually do the presentation, I didn't do that though. I didn't have the guts.
I try to let you just do things how you want to do them sometimes because there's really no point in arguing with it. But like all of those mannerisms are fiat.
Oh, what's a Bitcoin mannerism?
I don't know if there, I'm not saying that there are Bitcoin mannerisms. I'm saying that whole thing, that Steve Jobs persona, all of that is fiat.
What do you think about the general expectation that's put on the innovator to be the one that communicates it out and does like the marketing and the explanation and education of that?
If you can't talk about the thing you're trying to sell, then don't try to sell it to me. It's that simple. So in Silicon Valley, what has happened over the years is that, at least in my observation, Steve Jobs kind of created this character. And I'm sure he lived it to some degree, but fundamentally it's a character. It's this visionary CEO. He's not in the basement writing code, but he has this grand vision. And literally once a year, he gets on stage for about an hour and tells you what that vision is. And that's like his way of saying, like, look at how great I am. I put on this presentation for you. But that's what it is. It's a presentation. And what happened is that he created this like persona that everyone then emulated. And I have people who are not highly productive people that try to emulate Steve Jobs. And I'm like, you don't run Apple, right? You weren't fired from Apple and come back with like a vengeance. Like, you're not him. Just be yourself. Now, if that was Steve Jobs' self, great. I think at some point in the beginning it was, and I think it just kind of morphed into what we saw at the end. But if you're starting out day one pretending to be Steve Jobs or trying to be Steve Jobsian or whatever they're calling it, like, don't do that. That's not you. And what I would say to your question is like, what are the Bitcoin mannerisms? It's that you are authentic. And so if you don't normally talk like that, if you don't normally interact with people like that, why are you doing that when there's a microphone and a PowerPoint presentation behind you? That immediately reeks of inauthenticity, because once you get off stage, you're not Steve Jobs. People can still talk to you after that. And if you're not that person on stage, it's immediately apparent that that was a facade. So why do it?
So I wanted to talk about another thing today, but I think we should talk about the waste in Silicon Valley when it comes to funding projects.
Well, there's no waste of silicone. There might be a waste of silicon.
Yeah, I keep saying silicone. Silicon Valley. All right, I'll say it again.
Why do you want to cut the times when I correct you? You always want to cut when I correct you. But I think the people need to know that Mandana is incapable of saying Silicon Valley. She always says silicone, and I cut it every single time for her. But today it stops.
Do you think that'll get me to stop? My husband's trolling me too hard today.
Today,
every
this
day
stops.
Okay. So I wanted to talk about something completely different, but where this conversation has taken us reminds me of something that Ian and I have been kind of working through about our approach to NextBlock. And it falls along all of the different companies that exist right now, companies and projects that exist around Bitcoin, and the decisions that people are making and how those projects get funded. And those decisions then impact projects that don't get funded or developers and ideas that aren't getting attention. It's just a very fascinating space to suddenly be in personally. And the strong opinions that you have, I think your instincts are spot on. And then a few days pass and there's a news article that you send me where you're like, see, this is what I'm talking about. So I would love to get into the funding of innovation. But before we get into that, what time is it, babe?
The current time is 872-633, and we're approximately 1,517 blocks since our last recording, and we're 32,663 blocks since the halving.
And if I gave you $1, how many acres could I get on sunny Bitcoin Island?
Today, you can get 1,035 acres, aka Satoshis, on sunny Bitcoin Island.
It is really wild that suddenly the Satoshi conversion is so easy to do in your head. Did you think it was going to happen this fast? Not the price, just me being able to convert from dollars to Satoshis in my brain.
Well, every time we go up an order of magnitude of 10, you just chop a zero off the end. So yeah, we're at the 4-digit conversion rate. When we cross over 100,000, we're going to drop into the 3-digit range, and we will probably not go back.
And that's just the USD. There's other countries, other currencies that are
yeah. I mean, there's
past this.
there's other currencies that are at like 1 million, whatever their unit is for a Bitcoin.
It's wild. I don't know if I've been in Bitcoin long enough, or if it's actually what's happening around the world, but it just seems like such a more sure, obvious thing today than it's ever been.
Well, the beauty of that statement that you just made is that it's always been that way.
Mm-hmm.
You just have learned enough where you feel confident in saying that out loud. And I think that's the cool aspect of Bitcoin, is that it's not so much the Bitcoin itself, it's the system. It's the system that has not changed fundamentally. There's only 21 million coins. They don't all exist. And there's an infinite amount of fiat and various things that are priced in fiat that are all competing for that 21 million Bitcoin. And as long as that is true, then it's always going to be the obvious choice, because you can make more of anything. They even make more land.
You know, recently, I don't remember which country it is. It might have been China. I could be wrong. They found a bunch of gold.
No, that was in Africa.
Oh, it was Africa. They found a bunch of gold. So it's not a limited supply. And
nothing. I mean, there's a finite amount of gold on this planet. We don't know what the supply cap is. That's the difference, right? Like there's a finite supply of almost every resource on the planet that does not grow naturally, but we don't know what that number is. We don't know how to measure it. Bitcoin is literally humans creating something that from day one, we know how much there is, how much there will ever be. We can reference that in relation to everything else. So if we do find more gold, fine. It's just going to be in relationship to Bitcoin. Before Bitcoin, if you found more gold, people didn't really know what that meant. You got to get it out the ground. You got to transport it around. And only the places where the gold actually shows up does it really affect the economy. So if you find a bunch of gold in Africa and you never take any more gold to, let's say, Australia, right, and the same amount of gold exists in Australia, and it's almost like a closed economy, then finding that gold didn't really affect Australia. But with Bitcoin, finding that gold will affect Australia, because people have Bitcoin and gold, and they'll have to make a decision. My gold is worth less Bitcoin now because they found more gold. That's the like aha moment of Bitcoin that I think anybody who's like on the fence or doesn't know or thinks they have some gotcha that like nobody else on the planet that's been critical of Bitcoin for the last 15 years has figured out. Like that's the one that gets me, is like people that are not intelligent on normal things are like dismissive of Bitcoin because they have this one nugget that they're like, oh, but what about this? And I'm like, bitch, you don't know anything. Like you don't know anything. Why should I even take, even if what you're saying is 100% correct, you don't even know what that means. Like you're just repeating something you've heard. And I just don't argue with those people anymore. I go, oh yeah, I didn't think about that. Just keep moving.
My man's sassy today, and I like it. So keep that energy for me, babe, when we talk about how projects are funded. There is this really interesting space that Ian and I are in right now with NextBlock and this project that we think is a very solid idea.
First point of contention. This is a company, not a project.
Oh, sorry.
No.
Oh.
I'm not saying that to correct you.
Okay.
I'm saying like this is where all of this falls apart, is that there are projects and there are companies. And I think a lot of what you're about to say applies to things that should be companies but are being run like projects. I just want to make that clarification because NextBlock is not a project. It's a company. We're incorporated. We have to pay taxes. Like we're a real freaking legit company. We're not a GitHub repository. There is a difference. Sorry.
Don't apologize, babe. This is what I want to talk about because it is a very interesting perspective for me, because when we first started this idea, Ian first said this will be a company. We incorporated it. We did all that jazz. And then Ian came back and said, actually, I think this is going to be an open source project. And I, as his wife, was like, what does that mean? How do we make money? And in there, Ian explained to me BTC Pay Server. And showing me that example of BTC Pay Server was supposed to, say if we build something that has same level of value for people, that could be the job where maybe you hire a couple of people and you are maintaining it, and different companies that use the server that we create, the attention marketplace that we create, they would just pay us or give us money. And that could just be how we sustain our life. That could be the income that Ian makes. And I thought, oh, this is really how it works. And you were like, yes, babe, this is how it works. These are how open source projects work. And I didn't completely understand it, but you did I think, good job of explaining it to me, and built confidence around that idea and that plan. And then, of course, if you've been along for this ride, you know that one day Ian and I looked at each other and we were like, nah, this is going to be a company. It seems like we're going to have to build a social media company. But I want to go back to the open source project piece of it, how you think about not just the decisions that we are making for ourselves for this idea that we have that's now a company, but how you think other people are making decisions around the innovative ideas that they have for Bitcoin technology and now Nostr technology.
Yeah, so I was very inspired by the My Trust in You is Broken BTC Pay Server documentary. And I do believe that the attention marketplace, as we've talked about the company, there's two sides of it. There's the social media part of the application, and then there's the attention marketplace part of the application. And yes, they work together relatively tightly, but fundamentally they are two different things. You could have both without each other. The attention marketplace could work like BTC Pay Server. It could. The problem is that the ask is a little different. So BTC Pay Server doesn't really ask you, the user, to do anything. It just says, use me as you see fit. And it has value in the fact that it exists. If we were going to do a similar thing with the attention marketplace, it in and of itself doesn't have value just by existing. It requires other participants. And there was just not a lot of desire to participate in putting ads in Nostr clients. And I get that. Like, I keep saying that, like, I totally understand why people would not do that. That is why when we circle back to, okay, well, we have to build our own client, I don't think that that client should be built as a project. And I don't think that that client should be built as, well, we don't know how this is going to make money. We'll just like hope that people give us one sat every time they zap someone.
Why is that?
I mean, the easiest way of saying is that that's not sustainable, number one. And number two, like, if what you're doing has value, people should be willing to pay for it.
Can we go back to number one? Is there an example that jumps out in your mind that is almost like an example that scared you straight out of ever approaching a company that way?
Well, if you're trying to run a business purely relying on donations, whether it's one sat per zap or large chunks of money coming in, you can't project. You can't actually run a sustainable business, because you basically are saying like, well, we'll just run until the coffers get low and then go around asking for money again and hope that we get it. But what happens if you don't get it? Does the product go away?
Do you think that some of these builders assume that someone is going to end up buying what they've built?
No.
Ah, interesting.
No, I mean, look, if you're sitting on a stack of like 100 Bitcoin right now and you're just like working on your project and you have no need to make money because you're like, look, if I work on this for 4 years, my Bitcoin is going to double. So what does it matter? If you're that person working on quote unquote projects, cool. If you're a person that has like an idea and $5,000 and you're trying to like get something out there, what you get out there better not rely on donations. Like, if you only have $5,000 to put into something, what you put out there better have money coming back in. Otherwise, you're taking a very poor calculated or uncalculated risk that you are just pissing away your $5,000, and you might as well have just bought Bitcoin with it and waited.
Can I present another alternative or approach that possibly someone in that situation is trying to take? They have an idea. They're trying to play around with this technology. They want to show that they have something to contribute to the space. And it's hard to break through. I mean, I'll say, years ago, Ian was very into Bitcoin, and Ian has been a software developer for 20 years. He's very into Bitcoin and Bitcoin technology, and you were applying to jobs in the industry, and it was very hard to break through.
That's completely different, though.
Is it? Because
very different.
So if you are, I mean, I'm not a developer, but if you're a developer and you just want to play around with this technology and you have an idea, you build something, it's a way to get your foot in the door, right? To say like, oh, I'm very humbly, this is a project that I have.
Maybe.
Yeah, I think that's possibly also
That's a bold
it
assumption.
is, it is.
I made this project, so you should hire me.
No, not hire me, but like pull me into these discussions, these talks.
I don't know you.
Yeah.
I don't know you. Like, the biggest part about Bitcoin is that it's an ego check, right? Like, it's an ego check. If you're unable to accept the fact that perhaps you were misinformed your whole life about money, or not educated about money, or perhaps everything you knew about money was wrong, if you're unable to do that, then you'll probably never get Bitcoin. But just because you get Bitcoin doesn't mean that you've like addressed all of your ego. And so if you're coming into this space being like, oh, now that I'm here, I'm smart too, listen to what I have to say, or look at what I'm working on. Everyone's working on their own stuff. Getting into Bitcoin, or now Nostr, that's like step one. Sure, I think the Nostr people are a little bit more social than the Bitcoin people, just from our experiences over the past couple of months and the past year. But still, it's like no one has to do anything for you. And I think it's just more rational to start from that perspective. Yes, this is a group of very helpful people, and most people want to help and will help if they can.
Incredibly kind, incredibly inclusive. It's very fascinating to see as someone who's never, I understand you say, oh, this is open source, like this is how people are, but it's still, as someone who's never worked in this any technology space, period, it's very cool to see.
Yeah, but this has always been my world.
Mhm.
So like this is just normal to me, right? Like I've obviously not done a ton of open source projects. I understand what open source is, and I understand why it exists. And I know that the origins and the history of it, which I think are more important than what it is today. But what it appears to me that open source has like devolved into today, hey, I'm working on something. You can look at the code, so you should donate to it because I allowed you to look at the code.
Mm.
And to me, that's just not a reason to give you money, especially the best money on the planet. If you had something in there that I could buy and show you that, like, I'll support what you're working on because I'll buy the service or functionality that it's offering, then you're not asking for money. You're just trying to have a transaction. But the origins of open source software, I was telling you a little bit about the other night, but the story that always stuck with me is back in the day, like when IBM was still a thing. The internet's kind of like happening. And IBM is the Microsoft of the day, right? And IBM is like, okay, we got to get on this internet thing, right? So how do we want to get in on it? And they decided they were going to make a web server. And I'm probably butchering the story, but this is in the book. What is it? The World is Flat. Is that the name of the book?
I think so.
So this story is in that
By
book.
Thomas
Friedman?
I think so.
Yeah. That book that he taught, that book, The World is Flat, he tells this story in there better than I'm telling it. But the basic idea is that IBM wanted to get into the internet space, and they didn't have any like internet engineers. But what they did have was a bunch of people that worked at IBM that were passionate about the internet, the same way that people are passionate about Bitcoin or passionate about Nostr. And so IBM says, okay, make us a web server. And these developers come back with a web server. And IBM's like, wait a minute, what's all this code? Where did it come from? And the developers are like, oh, it's open source. And IBM was like, who owns it? And they said, nobody. And IBM was like, that doesn't make sense. We paid you and nobody owns the code. How does that work? And they obviously explained it to the higher ups at IBM that like, well, if we use it, we agree that we're going to like contribute any improvements that we make back to it so that, well, we get the benefit, but everyone else does. But someone else wrote the majority of the code for us to begin with. And that's like the reciprocal idea of open source. The people who were providing that open source code, that was going into all kinds of web servers at the time. IBM was just making a commercial one they could sell to their clients. But there were tons of like open source web servers. The people who were contributing that code, that original open source code, none of them were asking for money. They were all just like, hey, we think this is really cool. We all have this problem on the internet. I wrote this code that does this, that solves this problem, and I made it freely available to everyone. That's like the origin story that I always refer to of like open source technology and open source ideals and all that fun stuff interacting with like the corporate world. And the corporate world was okay with it because they were like, wait, we got it for free, to the point now where most of the software on your apps on your phone are open source. There's very little original code that's like, I don't say very little, but
proprietary.
The amount of proprietary code is shrinking relative to improving the open source code that already exists, right? So Bitcoin is like a great example of that. Everyone gets to be a bank for free. Bitcoin isn't asking you for money. People are working on Bitcoin. They're making it better. They're on version like 26 now or 27 of the Bitcoin Core server or whatever. Like that's a lot of work. That's 15 years of work that I can just go download for free. And it's literally 15 years of multiple people's work for free. If Bitcoin was to start out on day one, like, hey, here's this thing, you could be your own bank, but please give me some money, I don't think it would have gone anywhere, because it's like, you haven't proven yourself yet. You haven't proven that you have this value that maybe it's 15 years later we're all seeing, but that was just the passion of a lot of people. And now it's playing out in Nostr, and people like OpenSats, I think they're not purposefully making things bad, but their existence is making it hard for people to separate. Like,
You're being very careful with your words.
OpenSats existing is making it very hard for people to separate, like, does your thing actually deserve money? Does your thing actually deserve resources that other people donated and said, hey, I don't want to do the time and work of figuring out which projects to fund. But when you do fund them, please fund something that I won't get extremely upset at when I see that you funded it. I don't know if they're doing the best job of that, but I think when people don't get funded by OpenSats and they're upset about it, I think that's like silly, because they don't have to.
Yeah, there's this constant back and forth that Ian and I are going through, because
it's just the fourth now. There's
it's
no
just
back.
me, right?
It's just
You've
you.
made your decisions. Right. So as you can imagine, we're going to these conferences. We're telling people the idea of the attention marketplace, what we're going to build, that we're going to make it open source. And it's the obvious question of, all right, like, have you guys applied yet to OpenSats? And initially we wanted to have our ducks in a row, like I'm very professional. So I didn't want to just submit an application. I wanted to think it through. We thought possibly after the El Salvador conference, we'd get to that. But I think over and over again, Ian and I, in our discussions, and as clearly you all can hear the opinion that Ian has around how things should be funded. If we are a company and we have services to offer, that should be how we make money. That's what Ian believes. But for me, I see the projects that are being funded and I think, well, our idea is pretty good, And Ian will say, but we don't have anything yet. That's what Ian keeps saying. We have nothing to show. And I'll say, well, we have mock-ups. We have our website. We have the designs. We have all these presentations. And Ian says, we don't have anything to actually show people yet. Until then, we have nothing. And why would someone give us money?
Yeah, obviously that's my opinion. Everything that you just listed off is like, we have these things. Yeah, in Silicon Valley, that's all you need to go get money.
What about Silicon Valley?
Yeah. And I think that's part of the problem. One of the things your dad said to me at Thanksgiving, he was like, oh, aren't you worried about someone stealing your idea? And I said, well, the irony is no, because the idea that we have come up with, that we are working on, is if you steal it, that only benefits me. Because if you steal the idea for the attention marketplace in its entirety, part of that means that I can plug in and I'm not boxed out. So if you want to build the attention marketplace for me, great. But if you don't let me plug in, I'm just going to build it anyway, because that's part of the idea, is that other people can use it. So
did my dad understand that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the part that I think a lot of people have their immediate cognitive dissonance. And it kind of, I don't like to point out that people possibly think about things wrong, right? Like, it's like, I just want to kind of put it in front of you as like, why do you think that that's the case or the problem? But I do think that this fear of having your idea stolen comes from the fact that you don't have to have anything to raise money in the venture capitalist tech company Silicon Valley world. Personally, I don't want to, and I never wanted to in the past, and I definitely don't want to do it now. I don't really have a problem raising money. I'm just not trying to do it off a PowerPoint presentation, because what happens is two things. Number one, the person looking at your PowerPoint presentation, they're going to see everything that you're about to do, whether they're a good actor or a bad actor. They're going to try to get the most from you for the least amount possible, because you have nothing and you're there begging. You brought a PowerPoint presentation, but you're fundamentally begging for money. And if they don't give it to you, you're going to walk out the door and go to someone else and beg them for money. That is what venture capitalists want. They want you begging. But if you have a business that's running and you have revenue and you're already profitable, you can still go raise money. It's just a very different conversation. And that's what you see on something like Shark Tank, where some people come there They don't really have much. But some people are like, I don't really freaking need you. This is just a commercial for me,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'd rather be in that position. And to be in that position, you have to have something. So the attention marketplace is the business model for NextBlock. And I believe that the business model is sound. So we're going to build it. We're going to see how that business model plays out. If the business model works, theoretically, we don't have to raise any money if we're patient. But if we're impatient, we can go raise some money then. It'll be a very different conversation because if it's working, everybody will come to us.
So, on the topic of VCs, Ian, you sent me an article a few days ago from Forbes that says the great tech wake up call. VCs discover billions wasted on inefficient engineering teams.
That article is some BS, but I said it to you because it's true. They're trying to blame a lot of these tech companies that get funded with basically nothing on inefficient engineering teams. Engineering teams didn't raise the money. Engineering teams didn't make promises. The engineering teams didn't do all of that, but they're trying to lay like this waste at the engineering team's fault, who are, and I stand by this, I don't care if it hurts feelings. If you don't have engineers in your company, you don't have anything. So to blame the inefficient engineers for like what's happened in Silicon Valley for the last 4 years is complete BS, but it's written by Forbes. So what do you expect?
I apologize if I've already told the story, but when we were in El Salvador the night before the conference, I was talking, about NextBlock, and someone, heard about the idea in this group discussion and asked, well, who's on your team? And I said, oh, it's just me and my husband. And she said, oh, he's your developer? And I said, yeah, he's my developer. And she was like, wow, okay. Like, that's the winning ticket. You actually have a developer. Because she obviously assumed I wasn't. But that really sticks out in my head because having a good developer is hard itself, right? Like just what we were just talking about, where you can be passionate about something, but not know what you're doing and think you're adding something, but are you really? All of those things. So finding the right developer. And, we know, being married to Ian, I know that developers, once they meet each other, they hop from company to company or project to project. If you like to work with each other, you take them with you everywhere you go. And so as Ian is building this company, he is thinking about the engineering team and he's thinking about the people that he's worked with in the past. So it is really fascinating to me where that can be where things fall apart if the engineering team doesn't have the support or is given the authority to design and develop the way that it should be versus possibly what's being dictated by, so-called management or external funding.
I've been in the startup world for a decade. I've been an engineer for 2 decades. And I've just seen so many decisions made by people that had no concept of how long things take because they had someone telling them that they needed to do that. And personally, at NextBlock, the longer there's no one telling me to do something, the better, because you can establish a better base, a more solid foundation. And I think a lot of the tech companies that I worked at and a lot of the ones that I saw start up and fail really fast is that they just didn't have a good foundation. And maybe they had a good idea. They executed on that idea and they went to go do something else and found out they couldn't do it without rewriting everything. I forget who said it, but someone said, like, if you can't iterate on it, you don't have anything.
Because things will change. There will be things that you didn't think through yet. And you don't want to get stuck.
Well, like this is the VC problem. It's I'll give you some money, not a lot though, right? Because VCs are pimps, remember? So they're not going to give you enough money to be free. They're just going to give you enough money so that you are still working for them. And this is not all VCs. I'm just saying, like, if you don't see it like this, you will probably end up with a VC like this, right? There are some VCs that are not like this at all. But this, from my observation, this seems to be easily 60, 70, 80% of the VCs that exist. I'll give you $500,000. I'll give you $1 million. Now, if you hire one engineer, that'll last you a couple years. But when I give you that $1 million, I tell you, and I need to see this XYZ in 6 months. So what am I going to do? I'm going to spend the full $1 million to hire more people to accomplish that particular KPI that you set for me so that you'll give me more money. And in doing that, I'm going to take a ton of shortcuts. Depending on who I hire, they may or may not realize that those are shortcuts. They may or may not point out to me that those are shortcuts. And if they do point out to me that it's a shortcut, I have to make the decision of, is that shortcut worth it so that we meet this deadline so that this person will give us more money? Inevitably, almost every time that situation arises, if your founder is not technical, you think you explained to them the problem. You can go in there with the best PowerPoint presentation, all the documentation, whatever you think you need to explain to that person why you shouldn't do a thing. And you might walk out of there thinking, I've explained it fully. They do not give a fuck.
You know, I think this is interesting when we bring it to different Bitcoin companies and services and wallets and whatever it is. We don't know much about what's going on behind the scenes, right? Unless you're sitting in and listening to all the podcasts that the people from those companies are having and keeping up with the improvements that they're doing, the updates, all those things. It is a little scary that with our Bitcoin, we are entrusting an industry that's at least adjacent to Silicon Valley. Did I do it right?
No. Silicone is implants. Silicon is on chips.
Silicon Valley. Sorry, I'm overthinking it.
You are.
All right, maybe by the end of the episode. You know what I'm saying, though? And I think that this is a reoccurring thing in our conversations over the past few years around Bitcoin, which is, yes, it's decentralized. No one's in charge, but there's some people in charge.
There are people in charge. The difference is their bad decisions affect us less. That's what decentralized means. If I have my Bitcoin sitting in Strike, which I don't, but let's say I had my Bitcoin sitting in Strike, all of my Bitcoin. And before we started recording, you were talking about Bitcoin forks, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I have all my Bitcoin sitting inside of Strike, which means I don't have the keys, right? Not your keys, not your coin. So I'm basically saying, hey, Strike, hey, Jack Mahlers and team, if there's a fork, please make the best decision for me. And all I'm saying is that if they don't, you are not locked into Strike. That's what decentralized means. Like, you can take your Bitcoin out of Strike and take it to River. You can take your Bitcoin out of River and take it to Coinbase if you must, right? Like, you can take your Bitcoin other places. I'll give you a corollary. You can't take your Facebook account and all of the activity that you've had on Facebook to another Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
You're locked in. So as Facebook continually makes decisions that are better for them than you, what are you going to do? At some point, you have to declare bankruptcy and throw it all away and walk away. With Bitcoin and all these companies being decentralized, very similar to what we talk about with NextBlock and Nostr, like at a certain level, they are incentivized to make decisions that are good for you because you can just leave. If they do make a decision that's objectively bad for you, you know, and some companies have done that. That's the companies that blew up, right? Like Celsius and FTX and all those, right? Like, they're making decisions that are objectively bad for you. With decentralization comes great responsibility. So you have to know, is this person that I'm giving some trust to, can they make a good decision? And I would say that the things that I care about, I look specifically at, is the decision maker technical? Have I ever seen this person write about code, talk code? Like, do they like code? Are they actually in the tech, or are they just a suit without a suit?
What about these companies that are giving you Bitcoin back, like cash back, you know, those types of things? I think in those situations, it seems like, based on the conversations I've seen on Nostr, is that people who are Bitcoiners, technical, all of those things are like, I don't know how they're doing this, but I did it for a year while they were paying out this much, and they just, you know, they changed their business model now. But it seems like even when people know I don't know how this is going to play out, they use it while they can.
Again, risk reward.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you're willing to roll the dice and it seems like a low risk, why not? River is offering, River's not a sponsor, just calling it out. River is offering interest payments on your deposits in River. So you deposit cash and then you can DCA in. Well, while your cash is sitting there, they're going to pay you interest on that money. The way they pay you interest on that money, the USD that's sitting there, is that they're paying you in Bitcoin. So let's say the interest rate's at 3%. Whatever you're supposed to get paid out, you get Bitcoin deposited into your account, not dollars. I don't know how they're doing that. I mean, I have an idea how they're doing that. But what I do know is that fundamentally over time, that should just become cheaper for them. Like, if Bitcoin goes to $1 million and you have the same amount of Bitcoin, you can pay out interest for a little bit longer,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I know that's how it will probably work for them. I don't have their spreadsheets and see all the charts and graphs. But when I saw them announce that, I was like, wow, that's pretty impressive. Like, that's a bold move. Got my attention.
Wow, someone impressed Ian.
Well, it got my attention, right? And it doesn't seem scammy. Like, if you have the Bitcoin, right, And it's real Bitcoin that you're giving. And you're saying, if I give you this as an interest payment, you can take it out. Like, you're not going to make me hold on to it for a year or some crazy time frame. Like, it's mine the minute you give it to me. Cool. Why wouldn't I let my cash sit there? Strike doesn't offer that. And now there's a feature imbalance. And so Strike either has to offer that, or everybody will just DCA over in River, right? Like, if you're going to DCA $5,000 and you got $5,000 sitting there for a couple months, like, you might want the interest as well. This is decentralization when it's working, right? Like, it's forcing competition, but not competition like I need to wipe you off the map. It's just, now I offer a thing that you don't, and we'll see if the market responds. And if they do, then I'm up for a little bit. If you're not a technical leader, I think you might get tripped up when someone offers a scam that you think you need to compete with. And this is what happened with Coinbase and their product. I forget the name of it, but they were going to lend money against Bitcoin. They were doing that in competition, in my opinion, because other people were doing that, like Celsius, right? So there were all these people that were doing this: deposit your money here, and then we'll loan you money against your Bitcoin. And ironically, the SEC stepped in and said they weren't allowed to do that, which probably saved their butt, because those were the things that blew up that summer. So while Coinbase was sitting there screaming like, they won't let us do this, they won't let us do this, companies that were doing it were blowing up. I look at that and I go, I don't know Brian Armstrong, but like, the fact that they were trying to do that and at least publicly were upset they weren't being allowed to do that, meanwhile everyone watching it blow up, is like, that decision wasn't in the best interest of your users. It was obviously in the best interest of you. If you had blown up, people would not have been able to take their money out. That's what happened at Celsius and FTX, right? So like, no, I don't trust Brian Armstrong, and I don't trust Coinbase, and I don't think anyone should. But if you want to, fine. If you want to risk your Bitcoin with Brian Armstrong and Coinbase, fine. But I don't want to hear any tears when you wake up one day and you can't log in and you're basically broke and you got to wait. What has it been, like 4 years now? People are finally getting their like BlockFi checks. We got a check from BlockFi.
Did we?
Yeah, because we had the credit card.
Mm-hmm.
And so the interest that they had paid us on the credit card, it was like $13 or something.
You better stack them sats with that.
I mean, yeah, I'm sure I immediately bought Bitcoin with it. But that's my point. Like, you're just gonna have to find out the hard way. I take that to the logical conclusion for everyone. If you have an idea, if you keep calling what you're working on a project, then no one owes you any money. If what you're working on, you're calling a business, that means you have a business plan and a business model of how this thing is going to at least pay you. If you don't have that, then yeah, you probably are a project. But if you're a project, no one is obligated to give you anything. And anyone who gets butthurt that they're not getting something, I think that says a lot more about them than it does about the person that's not giving it to them, because that just means you haven't fully understood what's going on over here. Like, what's going on over here is, hey, no one's going to stop you. With Nostr, there's no barrier to entry. They can't stop you from using, if I get 1,000 followers on Damus and then switch over to some other app, Damus can't say, whoa, you got those users over here and you can't. No, if you have a better idea, they'll follow you. There's no walls on this garden.
All right, Ian, should we bring back Satoshi for your thoughts?
Your podcast.
You're very clearly passionate about your opinions on the funding of ideas in technology. How worried are you about how this will all play out for yourself, for us?
Well, the beauty of having a business model is that it's not a funding issue. If we build NextBlock and advertisers are willing to advertise on this network in the platform that we describe many times and that we will describe to them, if they are willing to do that repeatedly, then we just have a business. It's not funding, it's just a business.
Right. And if they're not willing to, then it's
not a business.
It's dead, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not working.
Yeah.
And we'll know within a year.
We will know this time next year if NextBlock is going to work or not. I highly believe that it will, but like this time next year, we will know.
And do you feel like you can say that because you are the technical person, you are the developer? Ian has started writing code on NextBlock. In case anyone was wondering, the code writing has begun.
I mean, the code writing began last January.
I know, but it's restarted officially.
Well,
now that we're incorporated as a real business.
Yeah, I mean, the code writing started last January. I wrote a prototype, and over the year, I just kind of I kept rethinking what we were doing, and so that required different approaches. But it turns out that prototype that I did in January is exactly what we're going to do. So I just need to really just recreate that so I know exactly where I am
And is your confidence in like, if our business model works, if we have advertisers, this is going to work because you know what you are ultimately designing right now and will build will work. You're not worried about whether or not the technology is going to allow us to do what we're trying to do.
No, all the technology exists, and this is how a lot of other things work. So it's not a question of can the idea that's in my head manifest itself in code. That's 100% true. Like it will exist.
And that confidence lets you know, all right, we can build this and it'll work. We just need to make sure that it will make money. And then is there any concern around, will people like it? Will people like to use it? Will it be pretty? Like, well, do you have any of those concerns?
No.
I mean, this is the confidence that you want to have when you're starting a business, you're self-funding. It's going to establish the livelihood for your family.
I think anyone who is starting a business should have some modicum of confidence. Don't start a business with like, we'll figure it out. That is part of the fiat VC propaganda that gets you into their world and working for them. Right? So think of it like there's so many different words people use. They'll say techno-feudalism. They'll say, new world order. But I was reading this thing this morning, and I think this is probably a better way of looking at it is it's techno sharecropping. And if you don't know what sharecropping is, that's the system they created after the American Civil War, where they freed the slaves, but then basically they loaned them a bunch of money to keep farming the land, and they became indebted, and they just never got out of debt. So it wasn't slavery, but it's so close that we have to come up with a new word so we don't get called slavers again. If you just have an idea, but you aren't a developer, to the point with the woman that you were talking about, you're not a developer, and she's like, oh, you have a developer, right? Okay, cool. If you're trying to raise money and you don't have a developer, odds are they're going to give you the developer. And it's going to be someone that they know. They know them and they trust them, and they'll recommend them or whatever, and maybe they'll have like 3 or 4 people for you to pick from, and whatever. But at the end of the day, you don't know that person. They do. People think the tech industry is like some other beast, and it's not. It's the same as the music industry. It's the same as the movie industry. It's the same as any industry. It just has this like facade of like, we're going to change the world. No one who ever made an album said they were going to change the world. No one who ever made a movie said they were going to change the world. But those industries all have the same business model. You have nothing, I'll loan you the money. You make it, I get a cut of whatever it makes. That's the business model. With Bitcoin, we do not have to do that anymore. You, with your idea, just have to be patient. And this is where I'm talking about with like the ego and like staying humble. Is you think your idea is good? Great. Can you afford to do it on your own right now? No? Then go stack. Go do the work yourself. Save up the money, whatever. Go stack as much Bitcoin you can. And eventually, Bitcoin will give you the resources to attempt your idea where you don't have to start off in servitude of some VC. Like if you see the world through Bitcoin that's possible, then if your idea is good today, it should be good in 4 years. And if someone did it, obviously like they had more resources than you, right? But if they did it with VC money, doesn't mean it's going to work, right? So like having the resources to do it is the important part. The world that we live in, most people don't have the resources to do it, but Bitcoiners do. And so if you're a Bitcoiner complaining about donations, if you're a Bitcoiner that has Bitcoin and is talking about like, I need funding, in my opinion, you're impatient because you could just go save more Bitcoin and wait. That's how I see it. That's what we've done. We could have started this company the beginning of this year and we had a lot less resources. It did not look like we could do what we want to do. And less than a year later, Bitcoin, in the least religious way possible,
took care of us.
Bitcoin has provided, right? Right? In the least or most, however you want to see it. But like, it is only because of Bitcoin. We could not have saved this amount of money in 1 year. So our job was to work on the idea. Our job was to make the idea as sound as possible. It's not to go get the money to do it. As I said, if your idea is good enough, somebody will give you the money.
Well, babe, I got to say, just as that woman was impressed with me, I'm very impressed with myself, picking you as my husband, life partner, and business partner, podcast partner. I love the way that you're thinking about all of this. It's an industry that I don't know well, but I really think that the approach that you are leading us on seems to be the right one. Time will tell. As the Bitcoiners say, babe, I think we're going to make it. We're all going to make it.
If you're patient.
get the power back, get the freedom back, get an M pub, and just start with that.